Okay, so in this video we're going to actually add our FTP credentials to Dreamweaver and upload our files to the web server that we had set up on a shared hosting account. In this particular case it was done on DreamHost. The nice thing about Dreamweaver is not only is it a HTML editing tool which has some neat features to help you along the way, especially with insert type features and file management, but it also is a file transfer protocol tool. Sometimes if you were using Notepad, for instance, on a PC, Notepad doesn't have an FTP, so you would have all the files built using Notepad, but you would have to use a different FTP software to upload it to the website. Now there are some popular free ones that are out there. One in particular that I know of is FileZilla. It's actually been a while since I visited this site, but looks like they have FileZilla for different platforms, so both Mac and Windows. And some of them are free, some of them are paid. But these are the type of softwares you need. You need an FTP client or FTP software in order to move files from your computer to a web server. And that's called FTP, File Transfer Protocol. Because Dreamweaver has a built-in FTP, we don't have to go get a separate software. We can do it right straight from Dreamweaver. In order to set that up, I would have had to set up FTP credentials ahead of time at my web server location. As I mentioned before, I'm using DreamHost, which is a shared hosting account, and I had set up a username and I'd set up a password. So here's what I have for a username. Philo, let me make this a little bigger. Philo141 is a username, and I have a password. By the time you're watching this video, I will have changed that password, but for the time being, that's what's working. And this is the subdomain website that I have set up. For this class, you'll have your own FTP credentials and domains set up in order to actually load your files to a web server. In this case, I'll be letting students create subdomains on my own personal website. But now I need to go to the remote server settings in Dreamweaver in order to get this to work. Alright, so here I am in Dreamweaver. Now every time I do this, it's very important that you have your local site set up. If you don't, you're going to need to go through this step. And probably through all the videos before this, anytime you're using Dreamweaver, it's best to do the site setup for each of your files, especially if you're using a template. But now it's even just as important before we can do a remote server, because Dreamweaver needs to know what files do you want us to put on the web server. If you don't have this set up, there's no way for Dreamweaver to know what files should go and which files shouldn't from your computer. Alright, so you would always have to set up the local site folder first. Then we come here to servers. Right now I have it blank. It lets you add one. Would there ever be a time you have more than one server for the same files? I have never had a time when that's happened. Not to say that it's not going to happen. So here's the window that we have to put in our credentials. To get this stuff, every hosting company has its own set of instructions. So in this case, I'm using DreamHost, and they have their own little forum, or in this case it's a wiki, that lets you find the instructions for how to use Dreamweaver. Your hosting company may or may not have specific instructions for Dreamweaver. In any case, you're looking for this stuff right here, where you at least get the server name, how it connects. Most of the time, I would say more than 90% of all shared hosting accounts will just use FTP. Sometimes you'll get a hosting account that uses SFTP or one of the other connection types. But most of the time it's just FTP. And you'll get an address, and then you'll have your username and password. Sometimes some hosting companies will require that you put in something specific for the root directory and the web URL. So that's why it's important to go through each hosting company's instructions. For this, I actually happen to have a screenshot of what we're going to need. And in this case, I know the names. Now this particular server name and username I used for something else, but this gives you the FTP address. It also lets you know that it's just FTP, the port number, and then the root directory that you need and the web URL. So that gives us, and that's not going to necessarily be the same between hosting companies. This can all be different per hosting company, so it's important to get the instructions specifically from the hosting company on how the FTP setup works. Alright, so let's go back to DreamHost, since I've got these things side by side. I know that my particular domain was called philo141.swanee.net. I'm going to go ahead and keep FTP, but there are other types of connections. So there's SFTP, FTP over SSL, TLS, and then sometimes if you are right there with your web server in the same room, you can do things over a local network. This probably only exists if you have your own web server and you have a direct connection to that server. So, with FTP, this essentially goes over the internet. With secure FTP, it's encrypted. That's probably a good way to think about it. Same thing with FTP over SSL. So these have added security so people can't intercept it. FTP is kind of open. Could somebody intercept your files? Yes. But it's fastest, and most of the time you don't have an issue. So most people just want things to be as fast as possible and simple. So FTP is the way to go. In this case, the FTP address, I have to very specifically put in the server name at DreamHost, and it's called 10barrel.dreamhost.com. The port's 21, we already had that. Now I had set up a username. In a previous video I had shown you how to do this at DreamHost, so we're going to enter philo141. And here is the password that was generated for us. And then the root directory, they want your server name again. And then for the web URL, they want 10barrel.com, dreamhost.com. Now in this case, Dreamweaver tried to put that added extension. I want to delete that. So this is what it should look like. And I can even hit this test button, and it said it connected successfully, so that's good. Now one thing you have to be careful of anytime you're doing anything with FTP is that you're not behind some kind of firewall that prevents FTP access. So sometimes you'll go to a public Wi-Fi system, and even though they're providing free Wi-Fi and internet connection, they may be blocking some things such as FTP access. And the reason why they do that is they don't want people downloading and uploading massive files on that wireless station, which is just going to slow everything down for everybody else. So quite often in public settings you can run into issues with FTP access. Or if you're in a place where it's really secure, sometimes they just add that because they want to eliminate the number of possible hacking vulnerabilities to their own internal system. So if sometimes you've got all this put in correctly and it's not connecting, you may get a message saying can't connect. You might be behind a firewall. Check your firewall settings, and in which case you got a couple of options. Either you need to change your firewall settings if you can to allow you to have FTP access, or you're going to need to go find a different connection. Okay, some of them are just not going to let you do FTP. So if you do run into that, it doesn't mean you did something wrong. It could just very well mean that you have something set up in your firewall settings that's preventing you to connect to FTP. Alright, so this connected fine. We'll go ahead and hit save and save again. It's now changing a little cache. Hit OK. And now over here you see the toggle for local view, and you can see all my site files, but I can also now check my remote server, and this is now going to show me all the files that are currently on the web server. You can see that there are just 3 files, and the first one you're seeing here is this thing called quickstart.html. This is something that my hosting company put in there for me ahead of time. So that because I created a new account at philo141.swanee.net, they automatically put these files in there. And that's pretty common. Your hosting company is going to put something in there just so it's not completely blank. If I go to the website now, you'll see here it is. This is the image they have there. And this is the quickstart.html page. And they put it there until you got something there to replace it. Now you know from your training before that as soon as I have an index.html file in this root folder, that all browsers are going to pull the index file and not the quickstart.html file. Okay? So this lets me know that I'm connected and I can see things on my remote server. Let me go back to local view. And here comes the part, this is the magic moment, where we put all of our files to the web server. And that's kind of the magic button, is put. You're going to see a lot of these other buttons, but I'm going to show you that this up arrow is the magic one. If I have my site folder highlighted, that's pretty much the same as saying I have all my files selected, right? Does that make sense in your local files? So with this selected, what I'm going to do is just very carefully and wonderfully and joyfully click this Put Files to Remote Server button. And it's going to say, do you wish to put the entire site? I'll hit OK. And it's going to start doing its thing. You can watch the details as it's doing everything. And then when it's done, it just sort of disappears. To let you know that this has all been put there, you can actually go to the remote server and you should see a copy of all your files. Now in this case, there are more files on the remote server than there are my local computer drive. And those files are the ones that were there before it started. Now what's really cool about Dreamweaver, and actually most FTP softwares, is it not only lets you put files, but it also lets you get files. So if I really wanted to, I could download this Quick Start HTML. So in Remote Server View, I'm going to have Quick Start selected, and I'll now click the down arrow. Now in this case it says do you want the dependent files to include transfer. Most of the time I just click no, I just want that one file. Now when I come to the local view, there it is. And I can even open it now in the local view. There's Quick Start. And I can also delete it. I'll hit yes, and then I can go to remote server and delete it if I wanted to. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for now. I'm not going to totally delete it. Now there is one more button that's a little tricky to use, but it's a good one, and it is the Synchronize button, not to be confused with the refresh. Synchronize will let you do quite a few things. One, you can do the entire site, but it can get and put newer files at the same time. Or you can get newer files from the remote or put newer files to remote. And then you can delete remote files not on a local drive. So a little more advanced settings. Before you do a synchronize, you really want to make sure that you have everything working. Now let's say, here's where you can get in trouble and learn from my pain. Let's say there was a file, in particular a style sheet that I had on the remote server, and I also have a style sheet on my local. Now normally anytime I start editing on my computer with Dreamweaver, I'm actually editing the local file, even though I might think I'm working on the remote file. That's not how it works. If I open this file and save it, I didn't save it to the remote server, I saved it to the local. So that's where it gets kind of tricky. You have to be aware that anytime you edit in Dreamweaver, it's being done locally. And once you're done, you'll always have to put. Always. Every time. Okay? So even if there was something on the remote server that you saw and you clicked on it and downloaded it and edited it, it's actually edited on the local server. See there, it automatically made a copy of that file. That's what you saved. So if I made a change, upload your website to get started, I'm a rock and roll star, and I hit save, I have to do a put in order to make that change. And once it's done, I can refresh my browser. In this case, my website showed up because it's pulling the index file. But let's go back to that quickstart.html, which is still there, and I can still go to it. And there it is. I'm a rock and roll star. But in this case, if I just go to the website now, you can see that all the files that we worked on locally are now live. The entire planet can see those. Alright, pretty cool. And there you go. That's it. Your site is launched, and anytime you now want to make a change, then you go to your remote server. I mean, unless you know you've got everything synced already, you can just go change anything on your site. And let's go ahead and change something on the home page. Welcome to the Philo webcomics. I'll add an exclamation mark. I'll hit save. There's my file. I put the file. I'm going to click no because I only need the one file changed. I didn't change anything else. And then once it's done its thing, I should be able to refresh the server and my change is made. And that's how we keep changing. So what's kind of nice about this is, let's say I change content on 3 or 4 pages all at the same time. I could do all of those changes without it affecting the real website, And then when they were done, I either have a couple options. I could put the individual pages that I changed, or I could just put the entire site again, or I could do the synchronize, in which case it will figure out what has changed the most recently and automatically put it up there for you. And then all of your changes take place at the same time. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we launch our website, and that's how we make future changes using FTP within Dreamweaver.